you explain, in your personal experience, how being a gay Muslim man was actually connected to your radicalization?
Well, as I was growing up, I basically started searching all of the fatwas, the verdicts that had been written by the Islamic scholars on what you should do if you have same-sex attractions. And one thing would come up over and over again, and that was become more religious, become more devout. And considering that I was brought up in a Salafi, Wahhabi kind of background, for me, it was a lot easier to become radical whilst I was trying to become more religious. So in a sense, paradoxically, I basically became more radical in an attempt to cure myself of my sexuality.
And in fact, at some point, were you considering a terror attack akin to the type that we've seen in Orlando?
I'm extremely ashamed to say, and it's always really hard every time I do answer this question, but yes, at one point I was considering carrying out an atrocity, and the atrocity I was considering carrying out was basically using an improvised explosive device.
And why? What would the point of that have been?
The point of that would have been, basically, I was brought up within the Islamist ideology. I was inculcated in it, and what it teaches is that the non-Muslims are at war with Muslims, that there's this never-ending war that's going on, and that basically non-Muslims want to destroy Muslims, and specifically at this particular moment in time, it's the West, led by the United States and the United Kingdom. So I believed, and this was something that I was basically brought up with, that my country was at war with Islam. Therefore, it was my religious duty to fight against my own country.
Suhail, how did you become deprogrammed to become the reasonable, rational person that we're speaking to today?
Well, that was a number of things, but initially it was doubts regarding literalist Sharia law that I was brought up with. The idea of stoning people to death and killing apostates just simply didn't make sense to me. It just didn't seem right on a visceral level. But what happened after that is that I kind of started looking into the theory of evolution, and that might seem strange, but when I kind of accepted the theory of evolution, I basically opened my mind to changing my religious beliefs as they pertained to Sharia, as they pertained to violent jihad. That is because the theory of evolution basically dealt a blow to my literalist, puritanical version of Islam that I was brought up with. And basically it was the work that was being done by the Quilliam Foundation, which is the world's first counter-extremism think tank in the United Kingdom, that basically led me out of extremism.
Suhail, you are obviously a very thoughtful, bright person, and you worked your way around through your own readings to be getting deprogrammed from that. But given the global spread of Wahhabism that we have seen, what is the answer to fighting radicals?
See, the thing is, I think it's important to kind of fight the ideology. Now, by all means, the overwhelming majority of Islamists even don't believe in terrorism. However, a certain proportion of them would believe in terrorism. It's basically you're primed into kind of becoming a potential terrorist. Basically, you don't wake up one day thinking, oh, I'm going to carry out a terror attack. You have to have brought into the entire narrative of us and them, of this never-ending war, in order for you to even get to the stage where you're considering carrying out terror attacks. And the way to counter this ideology is kind of twofold. Firstly, we need to counter the ideology. We need to point out to Muslims and to vulnerable individuals who are considering terror attacks, it's important to point out to them that these questions regarding violent jihad and regarding human rights, these issues were being discussed by the scholars of old openly. And it's time to kind of look back at the Islamic tradition and to revive it, and to basically continue on the evolution in Islamic thought that had been going on, but which now unfortunately has stopped.
Donald Trump here in the U.S. has suggested that because of some of what you're talking about, the spread of this radical Wahhabism, that the U.S. should ban Muslims from coming here, and it should begin profiling. What do you think of that?
Well, firstly, I think it's a very contentious issue, but I do think it is reasonable for countries to control immigration from countries where the populace holds particular kind of views that are contrary to ours. However, I do not think a blanket ban on Muslims is the answer. Not least because I think we should be opening our arms to liberal Muslims, to secular Muslims, to progressive Muslims, to reformist Muslims, simply because these kinds of Muslims, and there are many Muslims like that in the Muslim world, they simply just do not have a voice, because whenever they talk out, they are persecuted both by the law, by the state, and by their communities. So I think we need to open our arms to those kinds of individuals, and for that reason I do not think a blanket ban on Muslims is the answer.